you choose your career at 16, 17 years old, you could ultimately be doing that career for 40 years. That's it's a really, really long time. And I think nearly 20 years doing the same thing, it was time for a change. I've got sort of I get bored easily. I know I get bored easily. And so I like to challenge myself. I like to have variety. And I knew that it wouldn't give me that anymore. I needed something different. And I was really nervous. You hear these horrendous stories, don't you, about franchises. They're going to take your money and run and, not support you. And you do really worry about it, to the point where you almost think, well, it's more sensible starting my own business. Hindsight now tells me as long as you get the right franchise, it's much more sensible buying a franchise. Much, much more sensible.
So, Bill, welcome to the Disenfranchised. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thanks, Ed. Thanks for having me along.
No problem at all. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here, and thank you for taking the journey down. This is a new environment for me, and it's nice to actually be face to face with someone rather than doing one of these online. So, it's good. Your journey good down here?
Yeah. No, it's a fairly easy journey for me, to be fair. And you're right. It's nice to be in front of people in a proper building rather than sat in front of a screen. You get a lot more achieved. So I'm glad to be back in this room.
That's good. Yeah, I took a little walk as well, which I don't normally do. So before I came in here, so that's quite nice. But let's get cracking with the questions then. And my first question to you is the same as everybody else. I'd love to find out what was your first job?
Yeah. Now, if we go all the way back to when I was 13, I worked in my uncle's butcher's shop.
Oh, nice.
So from the age of 13, really through till I went to university, 3 nights a week and a Saturday morning. And then even at university, came back, worked there in the summers, worked there at Christmas, things like that. So yeah, I was a butcher. That sounds a bit extravagant, to be fair. I was washing up and making sausages and cleaning up and things like that. But I really, really enjoyed it. And I reflect back, and I've been asked this quite a few times in my career, what was the benefit of it? And I think for me, it was learning how to work hard at a fairly young age, and customer service. I've then sort of made a career out of dealing with people effectively. And I think that dealing in an environment when you're facing the customer from such a young age, you learn basics: how to be polite, how to be courteous, how to deal with people, how to get people to sort of enjoy the conversation you're having with them. So hopefully they buy from you ultimately. It was hard work. I loved it, but it was hard work at times, I have to say.
Yeah, it's quite a random one. A lot of people I speak to, they're, in the news agents, delivering newspapers or whatever it is, or in the supermarkets and things like that. So butchers, were you trusted with a knife at all?
I was, 13? Yeah. Well, because it was my granddad's business and my uncle's business. Unfortunately, it doesn't exist anymore. But I'll never forget my first day, and it was a Saturday morning, and it's an early start, so 6:30 at 13 years old is quite an early start. And my uncle said to me something along the lines of, "I don't care if you're family, if you don't work hard, you're out on your backside," basically.
That's good.
And it was a bit of a wake up call. But he was right. It doesn't matter whether you're working for family or friends, you still put the same amount of effort into everything you do. But yeah, I was trusted with a knife fairly early on. And actually my first job, and I think this is something you always did with new starters, was to make the pet food. And it's really not a very nice experience at all. It's all the offal and the offcuts and all the very smelly stuff stuck through a mincer and then into bags. And if you can do that and you can put up with that, then you can be a butcher at least.
I think that's kind of like the way of life for anybody, isn't it? The jobs that people don't want to do get given to the young generally, don't they? And that's kind of how you learn your craft, how you learn your trade, and move up from there.
Yeah.
But obviously, you've not become a butcher. So, what happened at that? Was there a point where you kind of started to look at your career and decide, actually, this is what I want to do, or did you fall into something else? Talk me through a little bit.
Well, difficult one, really. And I still, to this day, and I've got younger kids now, I find it very strange that at 16, 17 years old, you're being told, pick a career. I mean, I didn't have a clue what I wanted to do at 16, 17 years old. I wanted to be with my mates and play football and start going to the pub and things like that.
Same here.
But you are, aren't you? That's when you do your GCSEs and potentially go on to A-levels, then potentially go on to university. And I have to admit, at the time, I didn't really have a clue what I wanted to do. I had a brother who was at Nottingham University. I wasn't quite clever enough to go there, so I picked Nottingham Trent because I'd been to see him a few times and it was good fun. And I went there literally because it was a good fun place to be. And I started studying sort of a politics and economics course, and straight away knew it wasn't for me. That just wasn't for me at all. So I effectively dropped out of there after a year, and then went to an agricultural college because I've always loved the countryside and the environment. Would have loved to have been a farmer, actually. That's probably where my passion was. But, you know, to be a successful farmer, you need a big farm, and to buy a big farm, you need a lot of money. So that was never going to happen. So I studied environmental management at an agricultural college. And I loved it, to be fair. I then worked at said agricultural college for Essex County Council at the time as a sort of a farm advisor, so I'd advise farms on the environmental benefits of farming, moving away from intensive farming into sort of, you know, looking after the environment as well. And again, loved that for 3 years or so, and started moving weirdly into politics. So I was doing some political advisory work for local government, did some sort of a national government level as well. And I found myself at 22, 23 years old giving speeches to politicians about farm diversification and environmental management.
Wow.
And if I'm honest with you, I freaked out. I thought, do I want to do this? Do I want to be a politician? And the answer was no. And so I rented out my house and I went away traveling, and for 18 months just went around the world. You know, I wouldn't go as far as say I found myself and all of that, but I had a brilliant time, had a lot of fun, and thought long and hard about, you know, do I want to go back into the world I was in before? And the answer was no. But I then ended up in recruitment, and don't really ask me how. I applied for a job via a recruitment agency, and they called me up and said, I don't think you're going to get this one, but we're hiring. We like the look of your CV. Do you want to come here? And the rest is history. I then spent 17, 18 years working in the recruitment world before I then started doing what I'm doing now.
Yeah, cool. I'm going to come back to the recruitment stuff in a minute, because obviously my background was in recruitment, and I feel like we must have crossed paths at some point, maybe. But in terms of the politician sort of that you're presenting to or giving speeches to, at 22, that is really young, and you must have known your stuff, though, to be able to be confident enough to get up there. But I'm just wondering kind of what level of politician was it? Was it local MPs, or was it, you know? Yeah,
it was quite high. I mean, I've always been fairly confident, and I actually love public speaking, so that bit didn't bother me at all. But the farm diversification was really on a cusp in those days. You know, people were still intensively farming to get as much as they possibly could from their land, not necessarily think about what can I do with the buildings that are empty. And, you know, farm shops are everywhere now, and you see sort of woodlands everywhere and diversification everywhere, but it was fairly new then. And the organisation I was working for, we had sort of my equivalent in different regions throughout East Anglia, and a few of us, we were ahead of our time, I suppose. I don't sound arrogant saying that, but we were ahead of our time. And so we then started advising central government and regional government and things like that. And I did actually do a speech in front of, I don't know if she's still a politician, but Margaret Beckett. And at the time, she was the department leader for MAF, what is now DEFRA, Department of Education, Food and Rural Affairs. And it was it's called Portcullis House, I think it is, in Westminster. And it was scary. You know, there was about 50 or 60 people in the room all listening to me talking about farm diversification. I enjoyed it to a degree, because I do like that sort of excitement of being in that situation, but then suddenly realised that's not what I want to do for the next 20 years.
So was that the main thing you learnt from that experience then, is this is not what I want to do? Or was there anything else you feel you've learnt that's kind of helped you in what you're doing today?
I mean, yeah, obviously I think you learn from every experience you go through. And in that one, it was probably learning a lot about confidence, public speaking, dealing with people, a realisation in my head that whether you are, you know, a minister of parliament or you know, somebody who's cleaning up the streets, you're all just people, and actually you don't have to change how you deal with people. You just have to be the same, and continuously be polite and confident and try and help people out wherever you can. And the same thing is about hard work. So when this centre was set up for farm diversification, it was new. And our role was not only just to sort of help farmers on a journey to expand their income streams, but also draw down government grants for them and get them funding to help them do that. And you didn't do that easily. You know, you're talking about 200-page business plans to draw down £20,000 from European funding. And so it was hard work, you know, that was the enjoyable part of it, was helping the farmers succeed and grow, but realising the politics involved in a lot of that was probably not quite for me.
Yeah, that's fair enough. So moved into recruitment then, and completely different world, I would say, really, isn't it? You know, and did you go into an environment that was quite cutthroat? Because obviously there's different industries within recruitment. Some can be more cutthroat than others. So what area of recruitment did you go into?
So I wouldn't say it was cutthroat. It was a company called Allen and York, actually, and they're still going strong. They're based in Wimborne in Dorset.
Okay.
And it was environmental and sustainability recruitment. So it sort of linked to my background, which is partly why I think they said, come here and have an interview. And it was a relatively young company. And again, it was sort of on the cusp of that environmental boom. It was 2004, 2005, I think. So it was still a fairly new industry. And whilst it was a sales environment, it didn't feel too much like that. I joined and there was about 16 people in the company. And when I left 5 years later, I think it was, there was 60. So it grew massively over the time I was there. And there was the jokey thing of you did your training with the MD. Yeah, the MD did all the training. Mark Allen, his name was, a lovely chap. And it wasn't quite as bad as taping your hand to the phone, which you hear some of those stories in the recruitment world. But it was relatively target driven, and very quickly you are thrown into the environment. Here's a day or two's training. Here's a database. Here's a list of clients that we've worked with in the past. Start calling, and it's nerve-wracking. You've done it yourself. You pick up the phone trying to speak to fairly senior leaders in environmental consultancy world, and you've got to be credible and fairly quickly build trust in them. And I've always been the same in any sales environment, but probably recruitment is where I learned the most from it. Is nobody knows everything, and so I think the worst people in that industry, in any sales industry, pick up the phone and try and tell the head of department in environmental consultancy they know more than them. Yeah. And so I took the view, well, I want to learn from them. So I'd pick up the phone and say, what's difficult at the moment? Where are you struggling? How is your business not going where you want it to be? And from a people perspective, what can I do to help you fix that? So rather than just sort of forcing a bum on a seat, understand their problem, then go away and try and find that solution for them.
Yeah, and I actually think that's a really good structure for any sales. Like you say, if you know what the other person's pain points are, what their issues are, you can then tell them how your service or how you can help them, and it just makes everything easier, right? Rather than, like you say, trying to cram something down their throat saying you need to grow your business, so here's a salesperson, take them on, they're the best. It doesn't work, does it? So no, I get where you're coming from completely with that. And it's good to hear you didn't have that kind of cutthroat start. I know a lot of people did in that recruitment industry, and it's just sink or swim a lot of the times. But reflecting back on it, kind of now as a business owner, I think nobody's kind of done that to me, just sort of sat me down with a phone with my business and said, go and call 100 companies. I've had to build it up in a completely different way. So why do that in that recruitment world? It just feels like there should be more training and more support in that. But yeah, so then you've gone through your career. Did you say 17 years in?
It was 16, 17 years, something like that. A long time. So I spent 5 years, I think it was, at Allen York, and it was a great introduction to recruitment, a very honest business, and something I had a passion for. At the time, I didn't love recruitment. When I joined recruitment, I don't think anybody goes to school and says I want to grow up to be a recruiter, but it was environmental, which was my passion. And I then, at the time I was there, I actually met my now wife, who lived in Weymouth. I lived in Bournemouth, and her business moved to London. Okay. And so I think I was 18 months or so into my relationship with her, and it was very much, well, like, either I stay here and we split up, or I'll move to London with you. And I took the decision to move to London. I'm glad I did. 15 years later, 3 kids later, we're still very happily married. And so I had to leave Allen and York at that time, and I made a move in-house. I worked for a big outsourcing firm called Serco. Huge firm. You don't see much of them. They're in the background, but they employ 150,000 people worldwide, I think. And then went actually back into exec search, headhunting, and then back in-house. And the last 8 years, I think it was, of my recruiting career was in-house in consultancy environments, really. And enjoyed it. And it was very varied. But, I sort of lost that contact with the environment side. Okay. Funnily enough, a latter couple of organisations I worked for, one was called Arcadis. They had a big environmental function, and an old water board, Affinity Water supply company, which had big environmental functions. So there was always there in the background. But, I don't know, the last 2 or 3 years, I thought, I don't love recruitment anymore. Again, without sounding arrogant, I can do it.
Yeah.
I can lead the teams that I'm managing that are doing it. Where's the challenge? I'm bored.
So to be in that industry for a long time, though, there must have been something about it that you liked and loved. So what were the elements of it that you enjoyed most?
I think it was just so changeable. Everybody talks about no 2 days are the same. And whilst I do think it became a bit samey towards the end, certainly the first 10 years or so, it's so up and down. I mean, you've been in that industry yourself.
Yeah.
They talk about recruitment being a roller coaster, and it totally is.
Month to month.
Yeah, it totally is. I mean, particularly because you get a relatively low basic when you're in external recruitment world, and you're paid a lot on commission. And so, you can be working, and it's all going well, and all of a sudden everything just drops out, and you can't pay the bills, and there is that element of excitement to that. Bit different, I think, when you got a family, but certainly when you're single, and it doesn't matter so much. But I love the fact that it was completely varied. I also love the fact that whilst I've always been supported through my career, certainly in external recruitment world, you almost are self-employed, because you're given a phone and a computer and hopefully a list of contacts and a bit of guidance, but ultimately it is right, there you go, off you go, sell it, go and find the candidates,
Yep.
Clients, put them together, and that was exciting as well. And I think it always comes back down to the fact as well about helping people. I was helping people get their job, and I was helping clients get what they want and grow their business. Actually, oddly enough, I had when I announced I'm leaving the recruitment world and I'm buying a franchise, I put it on LinkedIn, and I've been in the recruitment world a long time, so I had a good few hundred comments on it. But the one that sticks in my mind was a lady, Ukrainian lady, who I placed in a company who was a startup company in the UK. And I could see, we didn't really stay connected, but I could see her career was going great. And her post on my LinkedIn was, "Good luck, Bill. You literally changed my life."
Yeah.
And that's why you do it, I think, isn't it? That's why you do that sort of career.
Yeah, totally. I agree. There was one guy when I moved out of the recruitment industry. So he was out in the Middle East somewhere doing work. He was a pipeline designer of some sort, and he was basically looking to get back to the UK and was struggling to find the route in. He couldn't find anyone to speak to who would give him that opportunity. And we had a good chat, and I was like, I think I've got the ideal role, and talked to the company about it, and kind of explained, where this guy's coming from, what his experience is. Don't, take that as a factor on his CV, and kind of talked it all through. And he was a similar message to yours. He was like, "Thank you so much. You've allowed me to come back home," which
It's lovely.
It's great, isn't it, to do that? So why did you fall out of love with that then? Because that obviously doesn't go away. There's still jobs out there. There's still people that need to find work. So what changed in your life that meant you fell out of love with recruitment?
I mean, I think I moved further and further away from the day-to-day recruitment. Certainly when I was in exec search and external recruitment, it was still recruiting. I might have been managing small teams, but at the end of the day, you still have a target, you still recruit. But when I moved in-house, and it was a very the decision was mine, and I wanted to do it because I wanted more variety. I didn't want to just recruit all day, every day. I wanted to get involved in employer branding and recruitment marketing and, all the other stuff that goes with it. And I loved it. And I loved it for a long time, and I was successful at it. But then realised, I think my third head of position in a big corporate world, I was just almost replicating what I'd done in the last company.
Yeah.
Slight variations, slight nuances, of course, and keeping up with modern time, but it was the same sort of thing. And as I came towards the end of about a 5-year journey at my last big company, Affinity Water, I thought, do I want to do this again? Do I want to go to be another head of somewhere? Because that's sort of the ceiling with recruitment. You can be a global head of, but you are that's the top of your game. And I thought, I don't, as much as I've enjoyed the last 16, 17 years, if I did this again, it would be very much sort of apply everything I know into a different environment. that was it. I think that was my decision. Is no, it's time to do something else. You know, it's a long time going back to what we talked about. You choose a career at 16, 17 years old. You know, you could ultimately be doing that career for 40 years. That's it's a really, really long time. And I think nearly 20 years doing the same thing, it was time for a change. Different people deal with things in different ways, but I've got sort of I get bored easily. I know I get bored easily, and so I like to challenge myself. I like to have variety, and I knew that it wouldn't give me that anymore. I needed something different.
Yeah. So I had this problem when I tried to move out of recruitment. You get labelled as a recruiter, and I was only in it really for 10 years at that point in time. So what did you see as your options, and how did you kind of go about exploring them at that point?
Well, funnily enough, towards the end of my career, I was moving a lot more into sort of HR. So again, Affinity Water, I was interim head of HR for a while, and realised that actually HR wasn't a career for me. I quite like the training side. I could have worked in sort of learning and development, and I enjoyed that side of it. But ultimately, I knew it wasn't going to be for me forevermore. So I'm lucky enough that I'm quite sensible with money, and I've saved hard over time. And I thought, well, you know, we've got a mortgage, we've got kids at school. I was actually the only income earner at the time. But if I don't take that leap now, I'm going to be in this industry for another 20 years probably, and bored. And so I clearly remember coming down after a long day at work and in lockdown to my wife and sort of sitting down and saying, I've got to do something different. And it was right in the middle or sort of coming towards the end probably of COVID lockdown. But I think that had a big impact on me, like it did a lot of people. Is all of a sudden I'm going from sort of driving into work, going from meeting to meeting, going out meeting people, to being stuck in a spare bedroom for 12 hours a day. And you make a lot of life changes in that time. And that was it. I came down that night and said, I need to do something different. And because of the way, again, my mind works, I'd already done a bit of research. So it wasn't just an off-the-cuff conversation. It was, I want to set up a property business. Cutting a long story short, I didn't quite have the money for that, and nor did I have the element of risk to do it. And so I looked into various franchises and different business opportunities and landed with where I'm at now.
So when you say you wanted to start a property business, what area of property? Because that could mean kind of various things.
Development. So I don't come from a building background, as we've talked about at all, but I've always loved property, always. And I've bought and sold a lot of properties, sort of bought them, done them up, lived in them, sold them on, until the time we bought what is our family home now. It's a new build because I was working, 3 kids. You don't have the time necessarily to do it, and I missed that and doing that at the weekends. And I've always had a bit of an eye for it as well. Yeah. I mean, my wife jokes with me. We'll watch these property programs. I love Grand Designs, absolutely love Grand Designs. And at the end of it, when they say, well, your budget was 500, how much did you spend? And I'd always pop up and say, but they spent 850,000. And within 10%, I was always right. Nice. I just have an eye for it and a love for it. So the business would have been sort of flipping properties, buying properties, doing them up, selling them on, trying to build up a portfolio where you keep some, sell some, etc. But it takes a lot of capital, and it's a lot of risk, and I just wasn't willing to go that far at that time.
No, that's fair enough. At that point in time, you obviously gone downstairs and spoke to your wife and said, I want to start a business. What was her kind of thoughts and feelings? Because whether it's a property business or a franchise, there's a certain amount of investment you've got to put into it, right? Even if it's just to protect yourself for 6 months in case it doesn't work out, right? So what was what was going through her mind at that point in time?
Shock. A lot of shock, I would say. I mean, she understood because she could see I hadn't been particularly happy in my career probably for the last 12 months or so. So she completely understood. She probably didn't know this was coming. She was probably expecting me to say, I want a new job. I'm going to change jobs. So it was a bit of a shock. But I don't know my wife well, obviously, and I know that she's into figures and finances and planning and detail where I'm not at all. So rather than just saying I'm going to do this, I sort of said I'm going to do this, and I've partially funded it. Although you're going to help me with the cash flow on the business plan. I know we've got this in the bank, and I know if I don't earn any money for 12 months, we can still pay the bills. And so it was a matter of sort of explaining the reasoning behind the decision rather than just coming downstairs and saying, I'm going to do this, and off I go. And at that time, no decision had been made. I'd done enough research to think, well, there was probably a couple of options I wanted to look at. This is how much money I'd need. This is what we need in the bank. So it was a fairly sensible conversation. If I'm honest, she'll laugh at this, but I was a bit shocked. I thought she'd be dead against it, but she realised that I couldn't do another 20 years doing what I've done, and she also knows I'm very family orientated, so I'd never do anything to jeopardise the family situation. It was a calculated decision.
Yeah, and I think it has to be, doesn't it? I think when I went self-employed, it was a 6-month series of conversations with my wife to get to the point where it was like, I feel like now is the right time. We're in a good place. She was fairly settled in what she was doing and had a plan for her career. Both of us have kind of changed what we're doing a couple of times in our career, and we know that you can't both do that at the same time so easily, because that your income has to drop if you're going to change industry. So it's a tough decision to make, and it sounds like you guys have planned it out really nicely and probably much more prepared than I was. But so talk me through the kind of the decision-making process then in investing in an Aspray franchise, and actually tell us a bit about what Aspray do would be useful as well.
Yeah, of course. So the decision-making, you may have been through the same, but people ask me this a lot. So how did you end up from working in recruitment to working in an insurance claim management business? And the answer is luck to a degree. I knew I wanted to do something to do with property, and I knew I liked dealing with people, and I wanted a lot more variety, to the point of sitting in a spare bedroom for 12 hours a day. I wanted to be out on the road, seeing people, meeting people, helping people. And it was literally Google searches, businesses related to property, how to start a business in property, and then moving down the rabbit hole of franchises. And I think I first saw Aspray's name on sort of top 100 franchises to buy, fairly high up, in the 30s from memory. And I saw it, and I read lots and lots about it, and I was really nervous. You hear these horrendous stories, don't you, about franchises? They're going to take your money and run, and not support you, and you do really worry about it, to the point where you almost think, well, it's more sensible starting my own business. Hindsight now tells me, as long as you get the right franchise, it's much more sensible buying a franchise. Much more sensible.
So just quickly, what was it you were looking for when you was reading all the information? Because I know lots of franchise brands would love to know that kind of answer, really, but also it's going to be useful to somebody who's investigating franchises themselves. What do you think they should be looking for?
Well, I liken a lot of decision making back to sort of my recruiting world. Why are you employing somebody? And in all the recruitment training I've done, you almost sort of make your decision within the first 60 seconds, and that's an unconscious bias. You do that. You can't help that. Yeah. But what the process of an interview is all about is them making sure that your bias was correct. Have I made the right decision? And you ask the questions, you understand people, and you look at their background, and nowadays you look at their social media, and then at the end of the 1 hour interview, 2 hour interviews, assessments, whatever you've done, you can almost sort of prove the hypotheses and say, yes, I've made the right decision, and therefore I'm going to hire this person. And it was sort of the same with looking at a franchise. You see this name, and you see an article that says, they're a great franchise, this is approximately the investment, but this is what they'll give you back. And I could have stopped there. And a lot of people probably do stop there and jump right in, but that's not my nature. So then, again, it was rabbit holes of what are their reviews, who can I find on LinkedIn who's done it recently, pop them a message. And I probably shouldn't have done that sort of thing, but I'm going to do my research before I join. Really understand the history of the organization. When was it set up? Why was it set up? What do they ask people when you go in and you franchise it? And some of that you can get online, but ultimately there was the day where I had to pick up the phone and say, look, I'm interested. And I think that says a lot about a company is the request of information that they're looking for from you. But then ultimately, once I did that research and had an understanding of what people thought about Aspray from an online perspective, it was more about that moment you pick up the phone and how they dealt with me. And what their process was to sell me it. I suppose they wanted to sell me it, but they wanted to make sure I was a right fit for them as well, and that was so important to me. Rather than yes, come and join us, give us the money and off you go. It was a very thorough process of, I don't know how many conversations with the recruitment manager before I then did a business plan, before that business plan was then approved, etc. And all in, from that moment I came down to speak to my wife that evening to being accepted into the franchise was probably a good 6 months or so.
Yeah.
And that for me spoke wonders. That's what I wanted, and I wanted to get a good feeling from the people I was dealing with.
Yeah, no, that's cool, and it's good to hear they're going to that level, because I think it's, let's say, warning signs if they're just like, have you got the money? Yeah. Sweet, in you come, kind of, process. Because ultimately, if they're not protecting their brand, so making sure they bring on the right people who are going to represent their brand, that's got to be warning signs, hasn't it? Really, that is everybody else in this network representing the brand in the way that you would want it to, because you're going to become part of it. So, I think that's a really important point you bring up there. In terms of the training then, so let's kind of move forwards a little bit as to kind of, right, you've made this agreement, you've signed day one, kind of what's happening with Aspray, and what kind of training and support did you start to receive from them?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's worth taking back a little bit from there, because ultimately I made the decision to go to Aspray because of the way that it dealt with me, in the recruitment process, because it was property related. Insurance isn't something I had an understanding of, but it's a contract, and effectively I've worked in contract law and employment law for a long enough time to put the two and two together. And then full business plan, some interviews, lots of research. So even that was, in my mind, that was training and development from Aspray, whether I'd been accepted or had accepted it myself.
Okay.
And then what happened was September, get my dates right now, 2021. I went up to the head office, which is Darwin, just near Blackburn, and it was 2 weeks of intensive training. And I was the first. There was two of us on the training course, but we were the first back after COVID, to the first face-to-face. And I'm glad. I think sitting on a Zoom call for 8 hours a day for 2 weeks solid, I wouldn't have learnt as much, and it would have been bloody hard work, quite frankly. So went up there. Day after my wife's 40th birthday party, actually, so I had a bit of a hangover the first day, but it was fine. So went up there for a week, came back for the weekend, went up there for another week. So it was 2 full weeks of intensive training. And back to the point of, I've always thought, it's a very hard art to understand people, and that's something you learn in recruitment very quickly if you're good at it. And it was very clear to me very early on that it was just a lovely bunch of people. And I don't actually know exactly how many people are in head office, but it's like 20, 30 people, something like that. And slowly but surely you met them all, went through the various aspects of training, and just every single one of them wanted to help. And that's what you want when you're learning a new trade. And so we had training on using the system, the CMS system that we have, obviously understanding insurance claim processes, so understanding what the contract says with between you and the customer, how that affects your claim, understanding how to spot signs of damp, fire damage, building costs, how much it costs to take down a wall and rebuild that wall, marketing your business, recruiting people that can introduce your services, dealing with people. I mean, it was endless, to be fair. It was really, really good training. Really, it was quite full on because you're cramming an awful lot into a 2 week period, and it was quite intense, but it was fun at the same time, and it's very practical. There was some of it sat in a room doing that, but there was also, survey this property for damage, and we'll point out what you've done right and what you've done wrong. And it was just brilliant, and now, well, was it 18 months or so into the journey, I still speak to head office most days. There's still a query, and they're always happy to help.
Yeah, that's really cool. And it's good that you mentioned they're nice people, they're good people. But it made me think, did you have kind of fears before actually going into that training? So you've signed, but I'm guessing you're still a mixture of excitement and fear. And so, what fears did you have going into that? And kind of, were they allayed after the training?
I think it's always the fears of have I made the right decision, and I certainly had those fears probably 6 months after I'd launched the business as well. But yeah, there's always the fear of have I made the right decision, and am I going to get what I need out of these next few weeks to effectively launch a new business. Very soon after getting up to head office, I realised that those fears weren't justified, because there's a team up there who not only give me that couple of weeks of initial training, they're there whenever I need them, and will always answer questions and point me in the direction and help me on my way. Don't get me wrong, I remember driving back from Darwin on a Friday afternoon after those 2 weeks, and it's a good 3.5 hour journey, thinking, my God, have I done the right thing? I'm on my own now, and you're driving home thinking, well, Monday it's the start of a new world for me. But then in the back of my mind was knowing that I've still got that support. It's not a franchise where you do your training and off you go. And I don't know enough about other franchises to know if you have almost allotted call times, allotted meeting times, and so on. It's not like that at all. It's very much help. I've got this. How do I do this? And they're always happy to help. The fear was more. And it was realised over the next 6 months or so is, I can't pay the bills. I was lucky enough to say I had 12 months worth of savings in the bank, so we knew we were covered. But, your paycheck's gone. That's something that takes a long time to get used to. You don't get any pensions, you don't get any holidays, you don't get paid at the end of the month. And that was scary. There was no fear from me on just getting out there and getting going. And I remember the first few months was quiet, it was really quiet, and I was walking the streets, going into letting agents and block managers and calling plumbers, cold calling people, without a lot of success, it has to be said, but you still do it, because if you don't do it, nobody else is going to do it for you. And so, even if you spend 3 days knocking doors and getting nothing, you might get something the next day, so you keep going. So the fear was nothing to do with franchise. The fear was, I've got to make this work. Otherwise, my family haven't got a house to live in the longer term. So I've got to make it work. I've got to do it.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. So you mentioned your first day. What did you actually do on the first day?
Yeah, I can't fully remember. I mean, what I'd done as part of my business planning process is, like a typical franchise, you buy a territory, and my territory is defined as Luton, but it's sort of a 50-mile radius around Luton in Bedfordshire. And so as part of the business plan, I'd written down all of the sort of insurance brokers in that area, lots of letting agents in that area, lots of block managers in that area, plumbers, etc. And then also lots of networking groups I could go to. And so day one was just, let's start, so, making sure I'd got the script right in my head of if you're a plumber and you introduce our services, I can help you grow your business effectively, and you can help the customer that you've just fixed a leaky pipe on, because I can sort out their insurance claim for them. And so it was just that. It was starting to call those people, starting to look at some of the networking events like BNI, 4N, and the usual stuff in my area, starting to going to some of them, and literally walking the streets of the bigger towns in the area with business cards and cakes and things like that to drop into letting agents. And slowly but surely, you do less and less of that, and more of the actual hands-on work. Obviously, realising you still have to keep the business development up, because you want to grow and maintain the business. But that was good for me, because I'd worked in sales for so long. That sales element didn't bother me at all. It was normal, but I didn't do this to remain in sales. I did it to deliver a customer service and help them when they've got an insurance claim. So I'm glad it sort of relatively quickly, in the whole grand scheme of things, moved away from door-to-door selling to actually insurance claim management work.
Yeah, no, that's cool. And I think the business development piece, like you say, it sounds very similar to some of the stuff that you would probably do in recruitment, right? I'm imagining a few less calls, and not so many KPIs as to you've got to hit 50 calls this week to CEOs or whatever it is. But how long did it take you to get that first client?
Again, I don't know for sure. I would say it was a good 3 or 4 weeks before I got somebody that said, yes, let's use your services. And it was a local letting agent who I'd met. And funnily enough, the day after he met, he said, one of my flats has had a fire. Can you help? And I said, well, yeah, of course I can. That's what I do. And it was just down the road from me. It was 5 or 6 miles away from where I live. And I met her that day, and it went from there. And then there was a subsidence case soon after that. And and bits and pieces came through. But to the point earlier about the biggest fear for me was not having bills paid and not getting a salary at the end of the month. In my mind, it was taking too long. I came away with an expectation that all of a sudden I'd be hitting my business plan figures in year one. It would be, as I'd written it down in the business plan, in month one I'll have this many clients, in month two this many clients, and obviously business isn't like that at all, but you don't really realise that until you're in the thick of it. And so in my head it was taking a very long time to get where I needed to be, and ultimately, we as claim management specialists, we don't get paid until the end of the process. Our profit comes at the end of the process, and the fire claim, the first one I picked up, was 5-6 months worth of work probably. So great to have it, it's brilliant, but I'm not going to get any financial benefit from it for a long time. So it was quite scary that it seemed to be a very slow process, but actually all you had to do was remind yourself that it is just a process, and you still got to make the phone calls, and you've got to see the people, you go to the networking events, and it will come, because you'll get your name out there, and next time somebody has a flood, you're the person they call. And it did. It took I think it took a lot of time. I spoke to other people in the franchise network who got up and running quicker than I did. But I think that's life. Sometimes it's luck, sometimes it's judgment. But the first 4 or 5 months probably I was questioning, was this a good investment? Have I done the right thing? Do I go back into recruitment? And I really, really didn't want to do that. And so I just kept going, and it turned around.
See, 3 weeks seems pretty quick to me. Like from the outside, I anticipated it might have taken a little bit longer because there's perhaps established relationships. So you've got to build up a little bit of a relationship with people. So I guess there's a little bit of luck, isn't there? You contacted that or met that individual on the day they needed someone, which is good. But it's good to hear that people are sort of doing it quicker and like you managed to do it within 3 weeks. I wanted to ask you, so as a salesperson, I've personally thought it myself, and I've gone out and set up my own business because I felt I could set up a business without support of somebody else. I've just got to come up with the idea and, then go out there and sell it. Did at any point you feel like I could have set this up myself?
No. A very simple answer, no, not at all. I mean, I could have probably set up other businesses. I could have set up a recruitment business very easily because that's what I knew. And the setting up of the business didn't fill me with fear particularly. I mean, I'm not great at the maths behind it, the tax, the paperwork. I mean, recruiters aren't good administrators, they never are. But I knew my wife was, so we set the business up together, and she's always done that side of it for me. But there's no way on earth I could have done the Aspray model, the insurance claim management model, on my own without the support that I've been given. I just didn't know enough about it, and even now, when the franchise agreement ends and do I renew, do I not renew? I suppose some people will go through their mind, I could do this myself and not renew with the franchise. No way on earth am I thinking that. Not at all, because of the support you get. It's a tough market to be in, and actually the people that got to get more clients more quickly than me, some of them would have been self-generated without a shadow of a doubt, but a lot of it also still comes through our head office. So they have a great network of insurance brokers they work with. Leads get called in from Google, things like that, and they get distributed. And so a lot of my work and a lot of other franchisees' work comes from head office. So they're not only there to answer your questions, they are also there to pass you work as well. There's not a chance I would ever do what I'm doing now on my own. I've still got an eye on the property game and buying and selling properties in the longer term. And, I don't think I'd ever do any sort of recruitment consulting down the line, but I certainly wouldn't do what I'm doing without the support of Aspray.
Yeah, no, that's really cool and really interesting to hear, because I think when a lot of people have looked at franchises, and I've been involved on the franchisor side before, people do look at it and think, well, why am I paying this money for? What am I actually getting for a bit of training and a logo? I think once you sort of dig into it enough, you start to realise actually, all these pieces fit together because they've gone through and made all the mistakes in the past, so that you don't have to, so you can get up and running in in 3 weeks or less, you know. And the fact that they're offering leads to you, I think is really great. And I think that's something that people need to consider when they're looking at franchise brands. So there are some that will give just minimal support, and they will probably cost less. And that might suit someone, actually. That might be all that they need, is a little bit of training, the brand and the strength of the brand, and off they go, and they don't really need that kind of in-depth level of support. And there are other brands that might even do too much. They might even feed you with all the leads, and so all you've literally got to do is kind of the delivery side of things. And that's not going to work for somebody who wants to be the one out there and generating business. So I think it's interesting to hear that that's the setup you've got there, and that you couldn't really have done that business without them. But I think it's just something interesting for people to consider and to ask is, you know, how much support am I actually going to get out of this, and justify that against the fee that they're paying up front. Because I think that's another hurdle a lot of people have to get over is, okay, so I've not only have I got to save up 6-12 months worth of salary for myself, I've now also got to add this additional risk of a lump sum up front.
And it's a very fine balance, and it's actually something I would always tell anybody thinking about setting up any business or buying a franchise, going into it, is have enough money, because you won't earn for a fairly long time, longer than you ever think you will. And it's not just about have I got X amount to buy the franchise, it's have I got X amount to cover the bills for the next 6+ months. And some people are maybe, you know, I'm quite risk averse, although I will take risk, I will take a calculated risk. Some people will just go into it and actually they'll be all right, good on them. But yeah, I would certainly say to people, make sure you've got enough money to support your family for a fairly lengthy period of time, because, you know, there was a time, maybe month 5, month 6, I was thinking, well, I've only got 3 or 4 months left and I haven't got the revenue coming in, but yeah, it did turn around. But yeah, you're dead right on the, I suppose, the cost benefit analysis, and ultimately it's what you can afford. That for my mind, it should be what it comes down to. But you know, you can spend nothing on buying a franchise. Realistically, you're not going to get a lot in return for that, because that's how life works. You know, you invest time and money into something, you're going to get time and money back. Aspray's was probably a fairly sizable investment, but actually in the whole grand scheme of things, not a huge amount of money. It was paid back in year 1. But I knew for that investment I would get a lot of support, and for the ongoing sort of royalty costs as well, I still get a lot of support, and I would never begrudge those payments to Aspray as long as they keep continuing to you know, serve me and my business as well as they do so far. But it's a difficult one for people going into any franchise, I think, is only, in my experience, only do what you can afford, of course, but do realise that if you buy a franchise for 500 quid, you're not going to get a lot, you know. You're not going to get an awful lot, and don't expect an awful lot. You know, you go and buy a McDonald's franchise for £1 million, you're going to get an awful lot. You know, it's a full business model that you just run, but £1 million is an awful lot of money. There's the two extremes.
Yeah, exactly. You're paying to get the ready built market, aren't you? Yeah. People coming to you rather than you having to go out there and get the business. But just moving things on a little bit, I want to. Actually, before I do that, I want to ask a couple of questions. So what do you feel is the biggest benefit to you now? Was it you're kind of like 18 months in, I guess. So what's the biggest benefit to you now of being part of the Aspray franchise?
So I would say flexibility, without a doubt. You know, I look back through my career, no regrets, never have any regrets, but there was one job where I was sort of doing a lot of European work, and it was when I had my first son, and so for 3 years I didn't really see him apart from the weekends. If I was lucky, I'd get back one night a week to say hello to him. We then so he's 8 now. I then had twins during another job, which was actually only about an hour down the road for me, and it was local based, but even then I'd probably see him 2 nights a week because I'd be in meetings and wouldn't get back to see him. And now I have breakfast with my eldest every day, and I have tea with them pretty much every evening. I bath them, put them to bed every day, and that for me is brilliant. You know, don't get me wrong, if work comes through that is urgent, I go and do it. Yeah, I'm quite work minded, but I choose that. You know, if customer calls me and it's urgent, I'll go and see them as quickly as possible. If customer calls me and it's not urgent, I have the choice, and I can say, look, I'll come and see you tomorrow instead of coming to see you in an hour's time. So for me, the flexibility is just brilliant. As we were saying before, you only get out what you put in, and if you did no work, obviously you're not going to get any revenue. But as long as you work hard, you can choose when you do that work. We camp a lot, so we go away camping 3 or 4 times a year, and I can do that still. You know, I've got a phone and a laptop, and as long as there's Wi-Fi or 5G or something, I can still work when I'm away. And if something urgent comes through, I'm only 2 hours, I can go and do it. But you know, I don't have to book that holiday. I just go away. You know, make sure head office are aware that, you know, I'm contactable, but you know, I'm not in my home location, and that for me is brilliant. And then, you know, I think the variety I get is so different from where it was before. I'd be, you know, meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting, grab some lunch, back into meetings. Latterly, that was all transferred onto Zoom. Whereas now I'll drive an hour to appointment, spend an hour with a customer, drive somewhere else, sit in a coffee shop for half an hour in between appointments, and it's just that variety.
Nice.
It's much more interesting.
Yeah, no, that's cool. So we've talked about lots of positives now about being part of a franchise and part of Aspray. What if any, do you feel are kind of the negatives or the not so positive elements?
If I'm honest, it's difficult to come up with not positive things. I mean, I've said it a few times, but the big one for me is you don't have a salary anymore. You know, where I knew what I was earning every month. I knew I'd get a small pay rise every month. There'd be a bonus. I've got a pension pot. I've got holidays, and we budget. I'm a budgeter, what my wife is, so we knew we could afford to live where we live. We could go on holiday once a year, all of the usual stuff. And not having that takes a lot of getting used to. I don't know if you were the same when you set up your business, but I was still getting up. I still had an alarm set 5:30 to sort of get up, have a shower, and be ready to work from 6:30, 7 o'clock, because they were the hours I used to keep. And I didn't switch it off. I kept that for a long time. And so the negative, if there is a negative, is it's a massive mindset change when you launch your own business or buy a franchise from being employed for 20 years. And it takes a long time to get used to it, a really long time to get used to it. And you don't actually feel the benefits of it until you tell yourself time and time again, I don't have to do that routine anymore. Yeah. I can still work and have a bit more flexibility.
I'm still struggling with that at the minute. I still feel like I have to do like an 8 till 6 or something like this, right? That's kind of in my head what I should be doing. And so if I have to, you know, one of the kids is ill or something like that, I feel like I've got to try and make up these 3 or 4 hours somewhere else. And I'm still struggling with that a little bit, but you do have to take that step back and remember that actually you've got to give yourself that lunch break, you know, of an hour.
Yeah.
You know, because you can't be switched on all the time. This is the reason why you set up a business on your own, or, you know, under a franchise, is to have a bit more flexibility in many people's cases. So, yeah, I think it takes a bit of getting used to that mindset shift. But when I have done things, it's helped me no end. So I am trying to build that into what I do in my daily routines, definitely. So
and it's worth doing. You know, I would say it was a good year or so before I was in that routine, but I don't now feel guilty as I would before. Waking up on a Monday, I've got no appointments booked in. I've got stuff I could be doing, but it's not urgent. It doesn't have to be done today. So, you know, I'm going to go for a bike ride and I'm going to take the wife out for lunch or something, you know, and you just can't do that when you're employed. No. You know, even if you're employed and you haven't got a lot to do, you still have to go to work and sort of almost show that you're doing
and you feel guilty. That's the thing that I'm still got the hangover of. I feel guilty, I think, if I'm not working those hours, and that's from when you're working for an employer. Yeah. You know, I'd never have bunked off for an hour because I'd have felt too guilty to do it.
It's a different mindset.
Even throughout the whole of lockdown, I probably worked more hours because I was worried that, you know, they might look at the output and go, well, what have you been doing? So, it's crazy. But no, it's good. And I'm glad the business is going really well for you. So final question on that before we go to my last 3 questions. And that's really, you know, what's the future for you then? I'm not sure on the length of contract that you have with your franchise license, but kind of what are the plans for you with your Aspray business?
So it's 5 years. So you buy the franchise for 5 years and you can renew and it is very much an if. So it's not just whether I want to, it's whether head office think you're doing well enough and they like working with you and you're providing the right service to customers. Sure. So it's a 2-way decision. At the moment, I see no reason why I wouldn't be extending my time with Aspray. I'd quite like to buy another territory if I can afford to do it at the time, so expand the business. I've got no real ambition to employ people and to grow this to a big, large-scale business. That might change, but that comes from 15 years maybe of managing teams, some very big global teams, and the headaches that come with it. You know, it's
Sure.
hard work. It's really hard work. At the moment, my wife and I run the business. It might need some sort of virtual assistant support in the future, and I can see the benefits of having maybe some contracting staff. But do I want an office, overheads, people, salaried positions? At the moment, the answer to that is very much no. So I realise I'm only going to be able to grow this business to such a size, but I also realise that I work bloody hard. And because of what my wife does in the business, I can just go out and be out on the road and doing the insurance claim management work and all the administration and all the the tax accounts and CIS accounts and so on. My wife can do in the background, which is a huge amount. And that's probably 40% of my time released to do other stuff. So I can get this business to a fairly sizable turnover with just the two of us. That's not a problem at all. Whether it gets to that cusp of you need a couple of extra people, otherwise you're going to start losing revenue, which is possible. Don't know where my head will be at that time. At the moment, I've got absolutely no ambition to do that.
Yeah,
but that might change.
That's fair enough. That's cool. Yeah, I mean, I think it's easy for people to say, yeah, I'm going to build a massive team, build myself out of the business, and that's all good. But like you say, if you've got that experience, you know it's a massive headache managing people and you don't want to go back to it. It's your choice at the end of the day, isn't it? I guess Aspray's model is flexible enough, from what I understand, that it can be both. It can be, you build up a team to make it run, or still work and operate on your own. So, I know you've got your wife, but no, that's really cool. It's good to hear. So, on to my final 3 questions then. And the first one is my favourite, and that is, are there any funny, strange or weird stories you're happy to share from your career?
My entire career?
Yeah, from whenever you want, really. Yeah.
Now you're asking. I've got one. I don't know how much we can use it on camera, but yeah, I've got one story from my time, and I won't mention their name because I don't think it's fair, but I was a in-house recruiter.
Sure.
And I used to run the HR administration team as well. And we employed a chap, and in his background checks, he was really good at engineer, bridge engineer, I think he was. In his background checks, there was a little note in there that he'd been caught with possession of marijuana.
Okay.
And we thought, well, we sat him down, had a chat with him. So, well, you seem really good. You seem very genuine. Is there anything we need to worry about? Or, was it a minor offence effectively? And he said, no, minor offence, just caught with the possession, and it was all done and dusted. Nothing to worry about. So we said, fine, we'll employ you in that case. Everybody's on a probation anyway. Turned out, after about 2 months of being employed and further checks on him, he'd been done for possession of about £1 million worth of marijuana.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Jeez.
So good job you do your background checks in this world, and unfortunately we had to say, as nice as you are, this is too much of a risk for our organisation.
Wow.
So yeah,
he has to declare it though, doesn't
he? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So and he hadn't declared it, and that was the thing. I remember having a conversation with him saying, if you'd have told me the truth, again, we may well have gone with you and trusted you, because everybody can change. Of course they can change, but you didn't tell us the truth, and therefore we have no choice. Your background checks of you falsified the information you gave us effectively. So yeah, that was quite one that sticks in my mind.
£1 million worth, though. That is not ridiculous. Small time at all, is it?
No, exactly.
Amazing. I think there's so many funny little stories like that you come across in recruitment. Yeah. I won't go into mine now. I'll tell you it afterwards. But it's crazy. So moving on then, what's been the proudest or most inspiring moment in your whole career?
Yeah. So as much as I love working and achieving in my career, I put my proudest moments all outside of work, to be fair, buying houses, having family, all of that. But to bring it back, because it's a career conversation. I would say there's probably 2, to be fair. One is deciding to do this and going for it. And advice to anybody is, as long as you're financially stable, do it. Just do it, because you only get so many chances in life. So that's probably my biggest one. And then, the other one would be my first head of role. It is quite a proud moment in your career. I joined an organisation as sort of a number 2 to the head of, but within 6 months they moved on and I was asked to do it. And it was, I was really proud of that. Quite scary at the time. You realise that the buck stops with you and you make the decisions and you start to reporting to a board and, all of a sudden you're a very senior person. But it's a hell of an achievement. And if you are career-minded, that's ultimately what you work for all of your career, I think, is to achieve the best you can achieve in your career.
Yeah, no, that's cool. It's really good. And in your personal life then? Let's go there as well.
Yeah, so I think the family. I'm 45 now, and I didn't have kids till I was 36, I think it was. And so I was relatively late, I suppose. And I had a great time, don't get me wrong, for the period of before meeting my wife and having kids. But Heaton, my eldest, the first time I held him, I realised almost to a degree that I've been wasting my life for the previous 20 years, because you, for me anyway, you don't know love until you have children, and they are just the most important thing in your world. And without doubt, having 3 kids is the most proudest moment ever.
Awesome, I love it. It's good stuff. So final question then. So let's imagine you're sitting in front of somebody who's potentially about to invest in a franchise, and you're only allowed to give them one piece of advice. What would that one piece of advice be?
Now that's a tough one, isn't it?
I've got a sense from what you've been talking through of what it might be already.
If I can get away with it, I'm going to give you 2 bits of advice. One is research it.
Yep.
Make sure you make the right choice. But 2 for me is do it sensibly. And the sensibly is financially make sure you are viable to invest in that organisation and have enough money in the bank to see you right for a period of time. Because if you don't, and it doesn't go well quickly, you're going to fail. And that's through no fault of your own. That's the fact that, you have to pay the bills. And so, if you do franchising, if you run any business, start any business, be sensible about it. That's probably the key word.
There's no guarantees, is there?
No.
I hear some brands call it a business in a box and things like that. Yeah, I think that kind of puts out the connotations that it's it's almost a guarantee. It's almost like a McDonald's, but even a McDonald's can fail. It has failed in certain locations. So there's no guarantees, and so like you say, do it sensibly, prepare, make sure you've got the right brand, and you're not kind of going straight in because you like the person that you spoke to once. I like it. Really good advice. So Bill, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. Thanks so much for sharing your story and for sharing your time with us today. And have a good rest of your day.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Cheers. Bye bye.